Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, by Hashem Yahweh Shai, by Hashem HaKadosh. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who taught us the truth and who rule well. Mighty shalom, to the brothers teaching week in and week out, prophesying the downfall of Esau Edom, as well as the deliverance of the hopeful Israelites, and peace and blessings to the hopeful elect, whoever it may be. This is going to be another in transit. This is the brother Yahweh Shai from the branch of Great Millstone here in Gary, Indiana. Like I said, it's going to be an in transit. And the title of this lesson is going to be one realm against another. And that's how it's going to be, when Yahweh Shai comes back, with his heavenly hosts, his heavenly army against Esau, his armies, as well, as the ones, the nations that's going to be in World War III. So, Lord willing, I hope this lesson is edifying. We're going to start this off at Revelations 12 and 7. It says, "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven." It says, "And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So it's not talking about, because people in the world, and Christians, they think, when it's talking about Satan, that old dragon and the devil that's talking about the spiritual demon Satan, the angel on the left-hand side. But no, it's talking about his physical counterpart, the so-called Edomites, or the Idumeans, if you want to call them in the Roman tongue, it's called the Idumeans, So it's a reason why, that Trump set up, their sixth installment of their military, that's called the Space Force. What are they prepared to fight against? And it's crazy, that the Space Force, one of their emblems, is a Hydra sign. The Hydra, you go back into history or just look up a picture of a Hydra, it's a three-headed dragon, if not more heads, but it's a three-headed dragon in most instances, so they're telling you there who they are, The dragon also represents, the NATO and the EU and in America, in the scriptures, so that's who Michael, the great archangel, is coming back to defend us against, and to fight against, during World War III, during the time of Esau's destruction. It says their place is found any more in heaven, and that heaven goes into rulership. It's not just talking about the spiritual realm, but it's talking about in the sky, and it's talking about, it's twofold. It's talking about in the sky as well as their rulership. So this is why and this is why I titled it "One Realm Against Another." The spiritual versus the physical or the carnal. Because that's what it is. The Heavenly Father's army, led by Yahweh Shai and then Michael, the Archangel of War. That's their thing. They're the spiritual. But they're coming back to physically fight Esau Edom in the heavens. So it's not talking about the spiritual demon Satan, fighting against other angels, and this, that, and the third. Ooh, out the bam. But no, it's talking about, when Yahweh Shai comes back, waxing with the thousands of heaven. Let me get that real quick. And so, like I said, this is in transit. going to eventually get that, but that's the spirit. Because I was already going to get that 2 Esdras 13. I'm just going to jump around this in the 2 Esdras 13 as well. This is 2 Esdras 13. Starting at verse 2, it says, And lo, there arose a wind from the sea, that it moved all the waves. Talking about destruction. And it says, And I beheld, and lo, that man waxed strong with the thousands of heaven. And when he turned his countenance to look, all the things trembled that were seen under him. And that man, is talking about Yahweh Shai. It's coming from a different realm. It's coming from the spiritual realm. He's coming from the right hand of the Heavenly Father Yahweh, to come back, to destroy, the ones that rule this place, and to deliver his hopeful elect. And it says, wherever his countenance to look, all the things tremble. That was under him. That's him coming back in his great chariot that's described as a mountain in this chapter. And the one to lead the army underneath him is Michael the archangel, like I brought up beforehand. So yeah, like I said, he's coming back with thousands. His heavenly hosts. Because when you go into the hosts, he goes into his armies. So that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to come to pass in a very, very near future. We seeing these nations gearing up for war. We seeing earthquakes in diverse places. We starting to, like brothers been bringing out recently. We're starting to see pestilences come. Diseases. Famine is on the way as well, physically and metaphorically with the word of Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai. These scriptures. Eventually, they're gonna try to get rid of the First Amendment. As well as this book. The scriptures. So after that point, they're already doing reconnaissance. I need to see where I'm going real quick. They're already doing reconnaissance on, the house of the thief, and I'm gonna get that as well in the book of Zephaniah. Before you do any type of war, or you want to attack someone, you have to do recon. You have to do a recon mission. That's what Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai is sending his armies to do. Brothers be bringing out, as well has seen, with their own eyes, likewise with myself, the chariots of Yahweh B'Shem Yahweh Shai. They're encamping around, the men of the Lord, as well as doing recon, on our enemies. And let's get that real quick. This is the book of Zephaniah 5. I'm starting at verse 1. It says, Then I turned and lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a flying robe. And that's what describes the chariot right there. It looked like a robe. If you could look it up, this is prior to me being in the truth. I used to watch the History Channel all the time. They show ancient aliens and stuff like that. And they always question, like, what if the so-called aliens were angels? But, they always show, the chariots. And they described one of the people of their military, I believe it was in the Navy, he described one of the chariots looking like a roll or look like a cigar or something like that. They called it a cigar-shaped UFO. And this is pretty much what it's describing, It says, And he said unto me, What seest thou? And I answered, I see a flying robe. The length thereof is 20 cubits, and the breadth thereof is 10 cubits. Talking about, this is a description of the size, the width of it, the length of it. And this is the point. Verses 3 and 4. So then said he unto me, This is the curse that goeth forth over the face of the whole earth. Exactly. Because we have multiple enemies, according to Psalms 83. The ones that had us in derision is the one that said, let's cut these this nation off from being a people. The Negroes, Latinos, the Native Americans, the Native Americans, the Israelites. It says, This is the curse that goeth forth over the whole face of the earth. For everyone that stealeth shall be cut off, as on this side according to it. Everyone that sweareth shall be cut off, as it on that side according to it. And who did they steal? The men and women of Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai, through countless slaveries, the Greco and the Roman, captivities, as well as this revived Roman captivity. It says, I will bring forth, saith Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai of hosts, and it shall enter into the house of the thief, and into the house of him that swear falsely by my name, and it shall remain in the midst of his house, and shall consume it with the timber thereof and the stones thereof. So it's not going to leave anything left in so-called, America, also known as Babylon the Great, or Egypt, or Nineveh, or Sodom and Gomorrah. This is all these places in one, and Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai is not going to leave any trace of this place left. He's not going to leave a road. He's not going to leave a building standing, a skyscraper, a car, trees, anything, a restaurant, your favorite restaurant. The Lord is not going to leave anything left in this place when he's finished with it, because first he's going to come from the east and disrupt World War III. Then, he's going to make his way to deliver his hopeful elect in America. So they're doing reconnaissance, enter into the house of the thief. He's seeing what's going on. They are beholding the wickedness and the righteousness in this place. The wickedness being, what's being done to us, as well as the wickedness, that's Esau Edom is doing, as well as our people. They're bearing record of what's going on, as well as the righteousness, of the men, teaching, this truth, prophesying, as well as the hopeful elect. And I don't know what just happened, but I'm gonna put this phone on Do Not Disturb. Let's go back into that. Let's get some more into that. So 2nd Esdras 13:4. And whensoever the voice went out of his mouth, all they burned that heard his voice, like as the earth faileth when it filleth the fire. And that voice, it's talking about the laser beam, the concentrated fire, out of the laser, out of the mouth of the opener at the bottom of the chariot. We got to remember, Esdras, he couldn't describe this in modern terms, so he described it as best as he could, and Yahweh Ba'Shem Yahushai gave us the wisdom, gave us the insight, to be able to prophesy and to understand this in modern day, modern times, to break it down to the people. It says, after this I beheld, and lo, there was gathered, Salakia, together a multitude of men out of number from the four winds of heaven to subdue the men that came out of the sea, and this is talking about in the midst of World War III, so like I said, it's going to be one realm against another, the average man versus the heavenly host. This is the midst of World War III, like I was trying to say. I'm about to get to my destination, but I'm gonna still finish this off though before I go in. I literally just got off work. But it says from the four winds of heaven, so it's talking about the four winds of the earth. All these nations, are gonna battle each other, and Yahweh Shai is gonna pull up in the midst of it. It says, but I beheld, and lo, he had graved himself a great mountain, and he flew upon it. And that great mountain is the description of Salakia. It's describing the great chariot that Yahweh Shai is coming back on, And this is the point I was trying to say. Him pulling up during World War III. Verse 8, it says, After this I beheld, and lo, all they were gathered together to subdue him were sore afraid, and yet durst fight. So the Heavenly Father said, hey, I at least want you to put up a fight, you know. So he put it in the blueprint of what's going on. So these men are going to be so scared, but the Lord's going to put a spirit on them to still fight, you know. It says, and lo, as he saw the violence of the multitude that came, he neither lifted up his hand, nor held sword, nor instrument, or any instrument of war, but only I saw that he sent out of his mouth, as it had been, a blast of fire, and out of his lips a flaming breath, and out of his tongue he cast out sparks and tempests, you know. And if you could use your imagination, or you have the spirit to understand what this is saying, it's talking about, you know, the laser beams. You know, just watch the movie Independence Day. You know, you could look up a illustration or a video on TikTok or YouTube describing what may a laser beam of a chariot look like, or a so-called UFO. You know, and that's exactly what it's going to look like. It says, and they were all mixed together, the blast of fire, the flaming breath, and the great tempest, and fell with violence upon the multitude which was prepared to fight, and burned them up every one, so that upon a sudden of an innumerable multitude nothing was to be perceived, but only dust and smell of smoke. When I saw this, I was afraid, you know. So they're going to be disintegrated, you know, with violence, you know, because this is not technology, you know, from this realm. That's why I coined this title, One Realm Against Another, you know, because this is heavenly technology, you know. Something so violent could come out of a vehicle like that is unworldly, you know. There have been plenty of statements, you know, that they try to rescind, you know, on government pages and stuff like that, describing how the chariots of the Lord, you know, can turn and go with speeds that's unworldly, you know. And the pilots of the Air Force or Navy, you know, they can't even describe it, you know, and they be shook with fear because they never seen nothing like that. So that's why that's so mighty, you know. I believe I had one more precept, but I'm at my destination. This place about to close. So I'm going to get this last part for the title of the video. And Lord willing, I hope this lesson is edifying. I believe it's on the 31st verse. Okay, we can start at 29. Verse 28, 2 Corinthians 13:28. And that he held neither sword nor any instrument of war, but that the rushing in him and of him destroyed the whole multitude that came to subdue him. This is their interpretation. So this is pretty much bringing back the summary of what he did. Behold, the days come when the Most High will begin to deliver them that are upon the earth. You know, it's hopeful that. And he shall come to the astonishment of them that dwell on the earth. Yeah, it's going to take everyone by surprise, you know. Like one of my favorite books, Wisdom Solomon 5. You know, they're gonna be pretty much they're gonna be surprised at the strangeness of our salvation. You know, all this shit they can't even imagine it. You know, they're gonna be surprised when he come back with the thousands. You know, and it could possibly be millions of chariots as well. You know, to destroy this place. You know, destroy the ones that's in World War III, as well as deliver the people they had at the bottom. You know, the ones that's considered the poor. You know, the one that's called bywords. You know, You know, I'm not trying to use no words right now, but the ones that's looked at as nothing, you know, in this place. And this is the point, verse 31. And one shall undertake to fight against another, one city against another, one place against another, one people against another, and one realm against another. You know. Let me see. And currently, that was the point I want to get. I could possibly make another video with the rest of the chapter. But Lord willing, I hope this lesson was edifying once again. I'd like to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the hopeful elect, whoever may be listening. Kwam Yasharala, Wa Abababal. Soon. Chemotherapy, 2026, Lord willing.